5 million salaried people in India lost their jobs in July. 17.7 million salaried jobs were lost in April. The COVID-19 pandemic is wreaking havoc on the Indian economy, and strict lockdown restrictions worsened the plight of Indian salaried class. According to the Centre for Monitoring Indian Economy, salaried jobs are not lost easily, but once lost, they are far more difficult to retrieve, and their ballooning numbers has become a source of worry. But these alarming numbers haven't woken up the Indian government from its slumber. According to the Indian government data, only 11.27 lakh claims were filed online through the official Umang app from April to July 2020. This is a massive 180% increase compared to the pre-COVID-19 period of December 2019 to March 2020. Till now, the Indian government has only relaxed norms to offer almost 4 million industrial workers 50% of their 3 months of salary as employment benefits, while the rest still await. A mind-boggling 57.3 million workers in the US now have filed for unemployment over the past 22 weeks. But the US's Labor Department has been handing out insurance benefits actively to its citizens. However, the Indian government is completely silent on releasing insurance packages. According to Minister for MSMEs and Road Transport, Nitin Gadkari, the government is yet to begin official analysis of job losses in the country.
Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to our show, It Matters. So, we understand that whole safety net for running an economy, what we call as unemployment insurance is not very strong. This is going to pose a huge risk and needs to be protected for any such further instances. But for now, we know the economy is entirely shut down. A large part of this workforce came from rural India. Many urban workers are also either working from home or have been let go. The point is that COVID-19 situation is not going to last forever. We all recognize that. We understand that. But when will these jobs return is the big question. Some say the economy will spring back. Agreed. We are resilient, but like many people in the industry, they will tell you it sounds easy, but may not be as easy enough. Because industry takes a long time to reopen. It only happens post capex is reassigned. So missing one whole cycle could mean that a lot of manufacturers will go bankrupt. It may all go down. There was a talk about some 20,000 crore package for the MSMEs and saving industry. Many MSMEs that we speak to today said, we haven't seen it come to us. Where has this money gone? Where and how is this going to restart back? I know many people who basically have decided to permanently shut 90% of their businesses. 10% is open. They're hoping it will sustain, but it is not still sustaining. So beyond the returning of the jobs, how will we refire the economy? What's the plan? What's the strategy? I have two people on the show. The first one is Jayjeet Bhattacharya. Jayjeet was a former partner at KPMG. He's a economist who's worked on the Asian Development Bank on this project going across to Bangladesh on this road project. He's done a lot of other things as well. He consults with the government. He's also a professor at the IIT. Joining me is Sandeep Agarwal as well. He's from industry. He's the vice president of TIMA, and he manufactures telecommunication cables. So let me start the show with Jayjeet. Jayjeet, tell me, first of all, these job losses today that you see on the ground, how difficult will it be to bring these jobs back?
So, let me take an analogy. The analogy is of a patient in a ventilator. So, the economy is right now in a ventilator. What that means is that the longer you are in, the more difficult it gets back to bring normalcy back, and it reduces the ability to bring back normalcy at an exponential rate. So if you open the economy now, as an example, I strongly believe that we can bounce back very quickly because much of the systems and processes are still in place. Now, if you start a greenfield project, then obviously that takes a lot of time because you need to test the market. You start small, then you start hiring, then you get your systems stabilized, and then you start growing. But when you are already in a growth path and you have been addressing to a larger market, and then you suddenly shut down because of extraneous reasons, it is relatively easier to get that process back in place because you know some of the ratios, the business ratios, you know some of the metrics of business, and therefore it's easier to bring it back. Obviously, there's a pain involved. But the longer one stays in this stage of flux, where there are more businesses that are shutting down, more restaurants are shutting down, it gets more difficult, exponentially more difficult month after month. So that's the status we are in now. If there is hope of vaccines coming in, and there is hope that everything goes back to normal in terms of the ability of people to operate and buy and so on and so forth, then I believe that you will suddenly see a huge pent up demand getting released, which will then lead to a very positive sentiment coming in, which will lead to a lot of investment actually flowing in, and therefore we should be able to get the jobs back. But if this delays to another 3, 4, 5 months, then there will be deaths of more MSMEs happening and small entities happening, and there will be a significant reduction in the production capacity of even the medium and slightly larger entities, and that will be quite damaging for us.
Thank you, Jajit. Sandeep, let me bring you in here. Sandeep, you have a view of how difficult it is for the economy to bounce back. It's not an easy task, and I recognize that. Explain to me from your perspective, where does the biggest challenge lie?
So let me make it clear. I'm not saying that the economy will not come back to its tracks. It will, it should, and we are all very positive about it. Now, having said that, what we are seeing is that the revenue to the government, the GST revenue to the government, has come down from say 125 lakh crores to very small numbers in the month of April, May, June, and now it is coming back on tracks to say 100,000, 1 lakh crores. So it has come down to 1 lakh crores now. The point is that when you see the breakup, of this money, most of the money goes into paying the salaries. Then comes the operation and the maintenance cost. And then only comes the capex cost. So what happens is that capex takes the least priority.
Right.
But capex has a multiplier effect. So if there is no capex, then you cannot expect future GDP growth to happen. So we may come back from minus 60% monthly GDP levels in April to minus 10. But if we need to at least grow at par with the previous year's level during this year, it will be only possible if we are able to invest, and we can do investment. It is the question of the finance ministry being too stringy today in thinking that, whatever has been the previous models in spending was that you have to make sure that the fiscal deficit is not there. Yes, it should not be there in the normal circumstance. But when emergencies happen, we need to keep on investing. So when Bada Imambada was made, it was made during the crisis time when there was no food available, there was no work available with the workers, and government gave them business to make a huge mosque. With that, people got business, they got food, and the economy kept on rolling. I'm talking about huge,
Right.
of the past, how it used to happen.
Right.
It did not matter that the government of that time had enough money to finance that at that point. It borrowed. No, no, money is a very strange thing. You can keep on borrowing it because it is a money, your money, I borrow, my money, you borrow, and it keeps on circling. And if we keep the circle intact, there is enough money for everybody and enough money to pay for the salaries to each of us. Ultimately, we are paying off each other.
It's true. It's a
Ultimately,
highly
we are paying
complex
off each other.
process, and not everybody understands that how a well-oiled economy will keep that circulation of money going for it to sustain and hang there. And any one of them falls in the economy, it's like the banks, right? If you look at a bank crashing, has a very large impact on the whole economy. So you're absolutely right. Let me bring Jayjeet back in. Jayjeet, I think Mr. Agarwal is making a very good point in terms of the circulation of the money and how will we make sure that there is enough money to float. What will the government have to do? I know there is a lack of money. There has been a large call for cutting down spending, especially in capex. Each ministry needs to bring down like 40% of its, of its planned budget from the last year. Explain to me, if this is what happens, how large can the impact be on the economy?
Very significant. In fact, I totally agree with Mr. Agarwal that there's nothing sacrosanct about the FRBM. There is no reason why we need to stick to the glide path of less than 3% and less than 2.4 and so on. That
What is FRBM? What is FRBM? I'm sorry, there are a lot of viewers I don't think who understand FRBM.
That stands for the Fiscal Responsibility Bill, which essentially says that the government cannot endlessly borrow, because what happens in a democratic system is that the government can easily keep borrowing and spending to keep people happy, but it drives the economy down the wrong path because you can't infinitely borrow. That's exactly what happened in 1990, 1991 when we were hit by the financial crisis, because populist governments, one after the other, kept borrowing and splurging, and it brought the economies down to its knees, where we had to actually ship out gold. So therefore, over decades, the consensus came up that governments cannot sign a die, keep borrowing, and infinitely borrow, and therefore there should be some limit to what the government can borrow. Now, those understanding and those regulations are under normal circumstances. This clearly is not a normal circumstance. It's a force majeure situation, exactly what Mr. Agarwal just mentioned. And therefore, for the government to say, well, I don't have money in my pocket, and this bill, the FRBM Act, also stops me from borrowing excessive money, therefore I cannot do anything, is not the right approach. And I'm hoping the government is not taking that approach. They should clearly come out and say, this is a different year and we will not stick to FRBM and we'll bust that number. And then that money has to quickly flow into the economy. To take some examples, the government came out with a smart city in 2015, the whole concept of smart city. By the time it got implemented, 2 to 3 years passed by, and that money did not get injected into the economy at the right time. Now, if you inject, let's say, $100 million in year one, then in year two, because of the multiplier effect, it will go up by at least $200 million in the economy, and so on and so forth. It keeps growing every year. But if you don't inject $100 million in the first year, and you inject $100 million in the fifth year, then the impact is that much lesser. And the point I'm driving at is that if you don't inject the money now in the month of August, and after all the deliberations that one normally has in a government and goes through that process, and we inject that money in December or January, it is much delayed. And therefore, that money needs to be injected right now. Having said that, one must also recognize the fact that there is a significant structural change in the economy that has happened. And normally the change leads to pain. Here's the other way around. The pain has led to the change. And the change, I mean, is in terms of electronification of the economy. There is a large-scale electronification has happened. Even though you are not allowed to have a drink in a restaurant, there are many states who are moving towards allowing the drink to be sent to your home, which was an anathema earlier, which is just not acceptable. Now, because of the change, many things have become acceptable. Much more stuff is happening over the electronic media. And therefore, there is a structural change that has happened in terms of how the economy works and how people interact and how money is flowing around. There is now more money flowing around digitally. There is more service happening digitally, more delivery of services happening digitally, and more interactions happening digitally. Which means that as the economy opens up and new jobs get created, one has to start retraining people on how they should adjust to this new economy and the new structure that is there, including how you do invoicing, how you file your returns, and so on and so forth. All of that retraining has to go in for the economy to actually come back and adjust to a new kind of doing business. It cannot go back to the old kind of doing business, and that's how we see the economy actually coming back on track with a slightly different structure in how the economy
Sure,
functions.
sure. Jajit, let me come back to you because I think restarting the economy has got another few little hiccups which I want to talk to you about as well. But Mr. Agarwal, as Jajit mentioned, we have to take a different approach on in terms of how this economy needs to be started, when it needs to be started. If you were to advise, and if you were to give a sense to people who are listening to your show today, is how much delay should they expect? And if you were to advise the government on what are the first steps they need to take for industries like yours to, stay afloat and keep the employment going? Give me a little sense of that.
So let me bring you to the notice of our people here also is that the government has a National Investment Plan, NIP, which for the next 5 years, 103 lakh crores needs to be invested into the economy. Now that is the kickstart, jumpstart plan which the government has made to ensure that the Indian economy grows at the pace of 8% or 7% plus. Today, the government had proposed that out of this 103 lakh crores, which will be invested over 5 years' time, so there is about 20 lakh crores worth of investment every year which needs to happen. And 50% of that was supposed to be coming from the government itself. The rest would come from the private sector.
Right.
Now, if this 20 lakh crores and 10 lakh crores from the government comes in today, even if the fiscal responsibility is not being met and we are overreaching, that is when the industry is gonna get all its work. If the industry shuts down today, it will be extremely difficult in an internationally competitive market to restart. I'll give you certain examples of the telecom sector, that over a period of time, how the electronics manufactured in India did not keep pace because the government came out with new technologies, did not give the same facilities for Indian companies to participate in those tenders. Foreign companies were allowed, and in a, time of around 3 to 4 years, when 2G came, the 3G came, the whole Indian industry was having zero business. That was because of the change in the technology and the government not giving full support to the local manufacturing. China did. China came out with its own technology and did not allow the American technology to enter them. So the Chinese developed their own 2G, 3G, 4G, and then obviously it got merged with the international specifications. Similarly, Japan did. So Korea did. Now we can also do it, and we need to first, government needs to invest. Next, it must allow Indian companies to take that investment and manufacture. It should not be given to foreign companies, so the return to the country will become very low because most of the money flows out of the country then. So this should happen, this 20 lakh crores worth of investment, which we should do in this year, or at least next year we should do 20 lakh, and this year maybe 15 lakh crores. This should come in. The problem which we are today facing is that even the private sector does not have the money because of being paying the salaries when the companies were shut, the factories were shut. We were not able to get any money. So the companies today have reduced profits to the level of 40% to 50%. Certain companies, smaller companies, are into losses. Many companies are even EBITDA negative, but that is the scale. Smaller the company, bigger the losses.
Right.
But the only uh, you know uh, the benefit which we see that yes, there is all negativity, but there are some positivities, which is that the rural economy is not facing the same trouble. So
Yeah,
rural
rural
economy,
economy is a different, and a lot of people didn't realize this in the beginning. People thought that
exactly.
rural India is going to suffer, but you have to remember that they are already leveraged so low that they have to do is turn off their switches. They have to sit back at home and really feed themselves, and their economy continues to go. But other than a few, fixed payment bills like electricity, gas, and a little bit of fuel, they are able to restart. But anything which is slightly MSME or larger, where a large part of the financial investment is already in place and they still have to continue paying bills, they're going to suffer. I know a lot of restaurateurs who are paying massive amounts of money in their rentals and they have no way of recovery out of it. Similarly, factories that have established factories, they have a large space, which means they have loans which they have to pay back. Plus, there is machinery line which they have to pay for. Plus, they have employees and they have to still continue paying, and there isn't the demand. What do you do with that money? So there are massive losses around that idea. And so I think there has to be a real core understanding of how an economy functions and what needs to be done to be able to manage that. All right, guys, we're going towards the closing of the show. Closing thoughts, Jayjeet, and then I'll come for closing thoughts from you, Mr. Agarwal.
I think two
Yeah,
parts.
hello.
Even when we're talking that the rural economy is kind of managing things well, we must keep in mind that they have also taken the brunt of absorbing a large amount of migrants going back. And what's the socio-economic impact of it? In fact, I would rather underline the first part. The social impact of that needs to be looked at. If these are underemployed labor who are hanging around the rural areas, they will possibly resort to alcoholism or would end up having, creating social disturbances. I think those are aspects that we need to be very careful about. And given the large statistics of the labor that has gone back, I think we should be mindful that they get employed gainfully wherever they are, either in rural areas or in urban areas. In terms of the economy going back to normal, I agree that the government has a very important and significant role to play. And without the government playing a complementary role, it'll be very difficult for the industry to come back on track in a short period of time. Having said that, I'm very, very optimistic that there is a large amount of pent up demand, which will be able to propel the economy back to its track very, very quickly, as long as we don't delay too much in opening up the economy, which is obviously dependent on extraneous issues such as the vaccine coming out in time. So I will stay optimistic, but there are a lot of work that needs to be done in order to ensure that optimism has a strong foundation.
Great. Thank you, Jajit. Mr. Agarwal, if closing thoughts from you.
Well, closing thoughts needs to be positive, and we are positive. Yes, tourism sector, hospitality sector is facing trouble, but the digital sector is booming. So the growth will be there in certain sectors. We need to just pull us by the bootstraps, and the government is doing well in investing heavily into the digital sector. So if that continues to happen, which I believe, because PM on the 15th of August has rightly emphasized on spending on this sector to increase 1,000 crore project for Lakshadweep and future projects also in the submarine cable lines and also in various BharatNet. So we are positive that whatever troubles the capex sector, the capital goods sector is facing today, that will be taken away with the investment strategies of the government, and we will be seeing a boom in the next year. And I hope and pray, but I believe it is going to happen.
One thing which a lot of people will not tell you on camera is that apart from a few industries that the Prime Minister is directly looking into, there are many of them which are not being invested into right now. Capex is frozen out of those industries. The Prime Minister is looking after a few certain areas, and obviously a lot of the money is going there. So I think what needs to be understood, it's not about who looks after that part of the economy, but what needs to be understood is the economy is whole together. It's not one part or the other. All parts of the economy must be funded. We must make sure that India continues to thrive together, not one ministry or the other. It is all part of the same pool. End of the day, whether it's rural, whether it's urban, whether it's to do with industry, whether it's tourism, we have to find ways of resurrecting people back. It shouldn't be that it's one section of the population does well and the other section goes away. It shouldn't be that the IT sector is the only one which does well, which means it's already a well funded sector. It goes up and the rest of the people get even poorer. So I think there needs to be a complete understanding of how everybody will be brought back up slowly. They all need to be at equal levels for it to come back up. It shouldn't be one or the other. So thank you, Jeji. Thank you, Mr. Agarwal, for joining me for the show. I think it's the most important bit of how we are as a society, and this is what's going to keep us alive. Good night and good luck.
Good night. Good
Good
day.
night.
Thank you.